public policy and its limitations.
Let's ask, this is Peter, just ask a question. Is this being recorded, Tim?
It is, yes.
Okay, terrific. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right, I'm having trouble. Oh, there you go. Okay, so economics, usually in economics textbooks, you start with utility theory, sort of, and all this really is based, there's sort of a mathematical structure behind this that goes back to the 1870s, so almost 150 years old. And it's a really, I mean, it's if you can sort of abstract yourself from the implications, it's really a beautiful system. I mean, it's been refined and again, by hundreds of people, maybe thousands over a long time. But anyway, the mathematics of this theory is what underlies things like cost-benefit analysis, marginal analysis, discounting, and a bunch of other things. So I just want to briefly say why behavioral economics is important here. So economists start with utility, which is generally broadly defined as well-being, anything that makes us happy. But then you go from there to a consumption function. It gets narrowed down to what makes us happy is buying things in markets or things that can have prices, apples, oranges, and so on. So a key assumption to make the mathematics work is something called self-regarding preferences. So my utility is not influenced by your utility. I just look out for myself. This is economic man, and most women don't mind it being male because it's sort of selfish and self-centered and so forth. Okay, so there's again a highly stylized mathematical proof of this. It has an important ideological purpose, and that is to show that competitive markets are the best way for society to allocate its scarce resources. So the mathematical, it seems really esoteric, but it really is sort of the scientific underpinning of the policies that most economics advocate. Get the prices right and let the market take care of it. So this is one assumption that you need to get the thing going in terms of utility theory is something called the marginal rate of substitution. So people trade goods until they're not willing to trade any further without making someone else worse off. And this proof doesn't work if one person's utility is influenced by another. So that's sort of last thing there. Utility of person A, and if it includes the utility of person B, then you don't get that result in the middle of the page there. So this is, I think, critically important, and this is why Chicago school economists sort of fight behavioral economics so hard, because they realize the importance of this and the ideological importance. And most people don't. They sort of see behavioral economics as something that's refined standard theory and kind of tacked on, but it's really much deeper than that. Yeah, so one of the founders of this is Vilfredo Pareto, going back to the 1800s. It's an empirical fact that the natural sciences have progressed only when they have taken secondary principles as the point of departure. And by this, I mean, you really don't look at motives. You don't try to look at the underlying psychology. You look at what people do, what they buy, the market basket of goods they purchase. And so this leads to something called revealed preference, developed by Paul Samuelson. You look at what economists do, or what consumers do, and not on how they make these decisions. So Pareto said, pure political economy is therefore a great interest in relying as little as possible on the domain of psychology. Now, when he was writing, this probably made sense. Psychology was a new field. It came out for what William James, I think, is considered the first psychologist, writing around 1900 or so. So, there was a good reason for this, but there's really no reason now. But anyway, so you begin with the market basket of goods, you look at what people choose, and then you assume that the underlying thought process conforms to this model of rational economic man, transitivity, non-satiation, and so on. Okay, I promise I'll stop this in a few minutes and get to something more interesting. But I think it's important to realize the the implications of the results of behavioral economics to this body of theory. And economists, they try to sidestep it. This is a quote by Hal Varian, probably the author of the best-known microeconomics textbook. A utility function is often a very convenient way to describe preferences, but it should not be given any psychological interpretation. He then goes on to sort of describe the characteristic of the utility function, monotonicity, local non-satiation, and all these. I mean, these are mathematical properties that really say something about how humans make decisions. So they are psychological properties. So you really can't get away from that. Once you write down a utility function, you're saying something about real world behavior. Just like you write down a production function of what's called homogeneous of degree 1, that means constant returns to scale in production. You double all the inputs and output exactly double. So these functions really say something about reality, even though a lot of economists deny it. Okay, you guys may already have seen this, which probably the experiment that really revolutionized economics was something called the Ultimatum game, published in Journal of Economic Behavior, 1982. And the idea is someone gives you $100 and asks you to share it with some known or unknown person, actually. You can give as much or little as you want to, but the person that you offer this share to can reject the offer. And in that case, neither of you get anything. So again, a very simple experiment. The implications of standard theory are clear. If you're more is referred to less, people are perfectly rational. So if I offer one of you $1 and keep 99, you're supposed to take it because you have $1 that you didn't have before. But in cultures with, quote, Western market economies, including Japan, the typical offer is around 40%. Anything less than 30% is usually rejected. And, the reason for that is because we all have a sense of fairness. I mean, the person getting the offer knows that I've gotten $100, I was asked to share it, and I give the most stingy offer possible. So they punish me by rejecting social norms, and neither one of us get anything. So these results have been found in hundreds of studies in a variety of settings and cultures. Okay, is this okay so far? Any questions, or am I going too fast?
All good so far. Do we have any questions in the room? No, not right now.
Okay, so literally probably thousands of studies have been done using the Ultimatum game. The best known one is probably one by Joseph Henrich, who has a master's in economics and a PhD in anthropology. Done some really good work at the University of British Columbia. So this was funded by the MacArthur Foundation, and a study was done really involving economists and anthropologists all around the world. They played this in 15 different cultures. The conclusion, the canonical model of self-interested behavior, that is, this axioms of consumer choice according to standard theory, was not supported in any society studied. Yeah, just to give you some examples of that, there was one of the studies was done in like a whale hunting culture, almost a hunting-gathering culture in Indonesia. And there was whale hunting is a communal effort. When the group caught a whale, there were very strict rules about how to divide it. So everyone gave 50-50 or even higher, because that's the way their culture operated. Another study was done among the Hadza of Tanzania, which was a hunting and gathering culture. And surprisingly, they gave relatively low offers, and the offers were rejected. You normally think of hunter-gatherers as being very egalitarian in sharing, but the Hadza live in a desert area in Tanzania, so they really hunt small game, collect the pickings are pretty scarce, so people go out in really small groups, maybe individual or 2 or 3, and they consume most of the stuff on the spot. The same thing is they didn't do this study, but the same kind of culture is the San of Namibia and Botswana. Another study was done of the owl in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and this culture is what's called a big man culture in anthropology. And in that culture, men are judged according to the number of pigs they have, and they're expected to share. And the act of giving is not only generous, it's also a way of asserting your authority. You know, I'm so important, I can give, say, Peter 2 pigs, and that proves my superiority to him. So in that society, people gave very generous offers, but the offers were usually rejected. So Peter refuses my 2 pigs just because he knows I'm trying to put him down and assert my dominance. So anyway, the point is that you can, in any particular culture, if you know the characteristics of that culture, you can make good predictions of behavior. But knowing the particulars, the economic base of the culture is a lot more important than knowing individual characteristics, you know, like gender or age or whatever. This is another study done by Kevin McCabe, and he played the Ultimatum game, and he just put one group, he put a diagram on the wall that just had these 3 dots. It sort of looks like a human face, you know, 2 eyes and a mouth maybe. Subjects who had a diagram like this near them made higher offers. Again, you know, the implication is that if you think you're being watched, even in this, you know, very subtle picture, then you make higher offers to show that you're not violating social norms. So anyway, so this game, more than any other thing, really did a lot to sort of undermine the axiomatic basis of neoclassical welfare economics. Okay, neuroeconomics is a much more recent phenomenon. Really, most of the stuff is done since the year 2000, and it's important because it really validates the findings of behavioral economics. It proves that these regularities are real. They're not just an artifact of the games, and it's also helped what the other things that are missing from economic theory, like the role of automatic decisions, emotional processing, and so on. And also shows the biological evolution of human sociality. Okay, sort of related to that, there's an economist, Ernst Fehr, it's the University of Zurich, and he played the Ultimatum game with one group given oxytocin, which is kind of it's a neurotransmitter. It's important in social bonding, like mother-child pairs of animals and so on. And subjects who were given oxytocin made much higher offers, about 80% higher than those who were given a placebo. It didn't affect the rejection rates. So again, it illustrates the importance these human attributes of sort of fairness, concern for others, concern with social position. You know, it's something real that's in human nature, something that's wired in the human brain. Yeah, this is a really interesting thing too. This is I'm part of this evolution group, and we had regular meetings again over several years. But one of the guys at the meeting that came to these meetings was John Allman, who's a neuroscience at University of California, and he's sort of resurrected these things, the importance of these things called von Economo neurons. These were discovered in early last century, around 1900, but the guy's name was von Economo, also called spindle neurons. And the purpose of them seems to be to allow rapid communication between the visual part of the brain and the limbic brain in hypothalamus, sort of with sociality and so on, judgment and self-esteem. So these are they're very long and very, very narrow. So electrons are transmitted very rapidly. So if you walk into a room, say you go to a party and you don't know anybody there, you enter the room and you're immediately looking around trying to size people up. Well, who is this person? Who's that person? What do they look like? Which ones are likely to be empathetic? Who do I want to talk to? And so on. So there's a lot of new stuff coming out that the large size of the human brain may be in part due to our almost unique sociality. And these neurons are also found in other social animals like great apes, cetaceans like whales and dolphins, and elephants. Not to the extent that they're found in humans, but it seems to be part of sociality and communication. Okay, I guess most of you heard of like Coco, the gorilla that they learned they taught sign language. Something like literally hundreds of words. Michael was a companion of his, another gorilla, and Coco actually taught Michael sign language, without any humans around. So it's a pretty incredible story too. Michael was raised with Coco, but also with human children. The researchers let Michael play and learn sign language and sign with other human beings. So he was really socialized in human culture. With human beings. Michael died fairly young. I'm not sure, maybe age 15 or so. And gorillas typically have, in terms of these von Economo neurons, they have about 5% of the amount that humans have. Michael died. John Alma did the autopsy and found that Michael had about 65% of the amount of these neurons that humans have. It's only, as he's said, it's only like a sample of one, but it's still pretty remarkable. And he's written some papers sort of making the point that it shows, a bunch of things. First of all, the physical nature, the biological nature of sociality, but also the something called gene plasticity, genotype, phenotype plasticity. So, all of us, really all living creatures, it used to be sort of this thing, one gene, one trait, and everything was sort of set. You have a gene for height, gene for eye color. But it seems to be much more complicated than that. And the phenotypic expressions of genes can vary greatly according to the environment. And this has all kinds of implications, again, for even economic policy and so on. People are really flexible. We have an incredible range of behaviors. The guy that's probably done more than anyone for neuroeconomics is Colin Camerer. He's an economist at Caltech in California. So the traditional view is that we go from preferences to behavior. Humans have this sort of fixed set of preferences. And again, according to Chicago School economists like Gary Baker, these preferences are really fixed. He says, like the Rocky Mountains, they don't change. And behavior, economic behavior comes out of that. But a neuroscience, sort of explicit behavior is only one of a bunch of different mechanisms that the brain uses to maintain what's called homeostasis. Especially this is something done by the hypothalamus. But so, our body knows that we were too hot, too cold, thirsty, or hungry, whatever, and we try to maintain a balance. So Camerer's written a lot about sort of consumption as being just sort of another mechanism to achieve homeostasis. So he says, rather than viewing pleasure as the goal of human behavior, a more realistic account would give pleasure as a homeostatic cue and information signal. So, are you content that things are in balance, or are you unhappy that things are not in balance? So anyway, this new stuff is really challenging economics at its very core. I mean, it's not just something that's an extension of standard theory or broadening of it, as a lot of people say. Okay, any questions? Again, I'm going fast as I usually do. Okay, so behavioral economics has made a lot of contributions to public policy. Most of you heard about blood donations. Offering money for blood actually reduces blood donations. The first study was done in Switzerland. Because if you offer money, it sort of cheapens the whole thing. I mean, people give blood not to make money, but to feel good about themselves and contribute to the social good, help somebody else out, and so on. Another sort of well-known case is opt-in versus opt-out in the case of organ donations. There's a checkbox on your driver license, I think. If you have to check a box, do you want to donate your organs, otherwise you don't, then the participation rate is pretty low. If you have to check a box, I don't want, the default is to donate your organs, you check a box saying you don't want to, then the percentage you donate is really high. And, there are a lot of reasons for that. It's a hard decision. You really don't want to think about it, so you sort of stick with the status quo. But again, in standard economics, it's not supposed to make any difference. It's the same decision. How you phrase the question shouldn't really matter. Behavioral economics has also been important in designing pension plans. And they found that if you sort of start low, small percentage at the beginning when you first start a job, and then increase as income goes up, then people act, sort of optimally save. Okay, so that's pretty much, this is kind of what I've done so far is pretty much standard. But I want to push back now on behavioral economics and talk about some of the limitations. And Richard Thaler just won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his understanding of, behavioral economics. He wrote a book called Nudge, which is saying, how can you use this sort of nudge people to do the right thing? And this is something about obesity that was in the New York Times. Okay, quote, Richard Thaler's work is important for understanding obesity precisely because he brought the discipline of an economist to understanding why people make seemingly irrational choices. So in the popular imagination, obesity is a failure of self-control. But Thaler says self-control is in fact unusual. Most people make daily lifestyle choices based on what is easiest and most immediately pressing. So this is, this is nothing new. So he talks in this article further about sort of, have sort of a rational brain and an irrational brain. You have one part of your brain that goes for immediate reward as eating, sugary products. The other part that looks more long-term decisions. Okay, the problem I have with that, these sort of individual explanations, is that they really don't explain this. I mean, why is the obesity epidemic so recent? Again, you can see even since 1980, really, has it been a problem. Percent of obese children was, around 5% in 1980. Now it's pushing 20%. I mean, people, the human brain hasn't changed. People weren't more rational before 1980. So, it has to be something institutional. It has to be something well above the individual level. And again, you see this over and over, sort of looking at individual behaviors and explanation of these things. Another thing is addiction. Economists tend to focus on addiction as an individual behavioral problem. Gary Becker, I think, wrote a book or a paper called Rational Addiction. Why do people do this? But again, why the big jump in the last 15 or 20 years? Around 1980, deaths from drug overdoses were about 6 per 100,000. Now it's closer to 16 per 100,000. So again, there must be some institutional, some policy, something that's happened above the level of individual behavior. Yeah, and this is something I think this was picked off the internet yesterday. So one of the reasons, again, in my old age, I've been getting a sort of much more political and actually much more radical in my political thought. But this was, the Trump administration's solution. He's promised to do something about addiction. But anyway, this report cited, really blamed the drug companies, the pharmaceutical industry. Decades of aggressive marketing, industry-sponsored physician conferences, and so on, aimed at expanding opioid use. So, what's behind this really was sort of marketing among doctors, sort of a redoing by the drug industry of the whole mentality. Any pain is supposed to be bad, you can take a drug to decrease the pain. So in response, though, now Trump wants to spend tens of millions of dollars to help the industry develop abuse deterrent drugs, non-opiate painkillers, and so on. So again, the solution comes within the context of this sort of a drug complex. And again, going back to obesity, a lot of obesity apparently comes from subsidies to the sugar industry, sort of changes in lifestyle, that promotion of fast foods and so on. So certainly there's an individual behavior that allows this, but the problem, we need to go up at least one or more levels. Okay, another thing that really bothers me is the notion of sustainability, and unsustainable behaviors blamed on sort of individuals or human nature. And I've been having sort of this ongoing, it's not really a debate because I can't get them to respond to this stuff. But it's not, unsustainability, I would argue vehemently, is not based on, and it's not human nature or human greed or whatever. The problem is this economic system we've accidentally evolved into. I think with the adoption of agriculture, we got locked into the system of surplus production that generated this whole superstructure of support. Extreme division of labor, political and religious ideology sort of promoting this growth and expansion. And all of us now are locked into this system. So unless we somehow begin to address the structural nature of unsustainability, then we're really not going to get anywhere. And I know these people, I know Bill, he's a good guy. But this is something that he wrote. Humans may pride themselves as being the best evidence for intelligent life on Earth, but an alien observer would record that the unsustainability conundrum has the global community floundering in a swamp of cognitive dissonance and collective denial. Indeed, our alien friend might go so far as to ask us why aren't a reasonably intelligent species seems unable to recognize the crisis for what it is. To begin to answer this question, we need to look beyond conventional explanations. What might well be the root cause of our conundrum, human nature itself. And again, Homo sapiens has been around, according to some recent findings, by something like 300,000 years. We didn't trash the planet until starting about 10,000 years ago. This is a table adopted by Vaclav, supported by Vaclav Smil. So again, 10,000 years ago, the population of Earth was something between 2 and 4 million. Humans were a tiny part of this is mammalian biomass. By 1900, we and our animals dominate biomass. Around 1900, this is when fossil fuels started pouring in, so we were able to expand crops, animals, and so on. And now we're something like 98% of mammalian biomass. So again, this is not human nature. This is something that happened, structural change in the nature of our economy that locked us into this. So kind of a picture showing the same thing. Okay, so another thing, just to be the last thing I hit on, is sort of the role of government. And these individualistic models really perpetuate this myth of the dichotomy between the government and the, quote, free market. But in fact, every developed economy is really dominated by government spending. It's something between 40 and 50%. The US, it's about 42%. Sweden, Norway, it's about 50%. So it's just a matter of who gets the money and which sections of the economy are supported or not. So who does government work for? So, for example, spending on healthcare in the US, we have one of the worst outcomes, I think the worst outcomes of any so-called progressive nation. We spend twice as much and get less. So who does the money go to? It goes to the pharmaceutical companies, so-called nonprofit hospitals and so on. So there's plenty of money there to have free health care for everybody, preventative medicine and so on. It's just a matter who's going to get it. At one of these evolution meetings, I had the pleasure of meeting Mariana Mazzucato, and she's done as much as anybody to sort of, publicize the role of government, the importance of the government in driving the economy and sort of driving these seemingly natural occurrences. And so this stuff, again, it didn't, the economy, these mega corporations didn't come out because they're more efficient. They came about because they were supported by power, controlling government power and promoting certain segments of the economy over others. So she says the real innovation engine in the global economy is not the entrepreneurial class blazing capitalist trails through the thicket of government, red tape, and taxation. The real engine of innovation is government. She's done this sort of case study of the myth debunking, using an example of the iPhone. Every core of the iPhone technology, capacitive sensors, solid state memories, GPS, and so on and so forth, came from research efforts and funding, support of the US government military. Did the public see an iPhone dividend? She says not really, in terms of sharing the profits that came from it. So all these really were, she names all the agencies that were responsible for the components of the iPhone. Yeah, a good example she gives, in Obama's corporate bailout after the crash in 2008, he gave the government gave a $500 million loan to a corporation called Solyndra, which some of you may have heard of. It was a solar startup company supposed to produce solar panels. And the company went bankrupt, and the government lost that money. And this is sort of a poster child of conservatives, showing the government can't pick winners and losers. Well, the other company the government gave money to was Tesla, one of the most successful corporations. And the U.S. government had bought, I don't know, forget how many tens of thousands of shares of Tesla for $2 a share. It could have exercised an option to sell those, to buy them at, it would sell those at like close to $100 a share, but didn't do it. So government investment, at least in the U.S., typically we eat the losses when corporations take risks, but we don't have any of the gains. None of the gains goes to the government if they're winners. So she says the government can do all kinds of things that private sector can't do, but it has to look at investment sort of like a portfolio. Some winners, some losers, some highly risky, and some aren't. But as Keynes said, the role of the government should be to do the things that the private sector is incapable of doing. Okay, just these regularities in economic history, sort of the importance of looking at these sort of larger scale, both in space and time examples. There's a lot of really interesting work being done on these sort of large sweeps of history drivers, sort of biophysical drivers of economic evolution. And these are all books in the last year or so. The first one is The Sun Also Rises by Gregory Clark. And he and his research team looked at really the inheritability of wealth. And they went back hundreds, maybe close to 1,000 years, to look at surnames in the UK, and especially which people went to Oxford and Cambridge. So, 500 years ago, 600 years ago. And they found that the wealth of your ancestors back that far could explain something like 60% of a person's estimated wealth today. So these things, inheritable wealth is turns out to be a really important thing in human history, driving inequality and so on. Thomas Piketty, Capital in the 21st Century, came to a similar conclusion. I've got some another chart on a slide on that in a few minutes. And a book I just started reading is The Great Leveler, Walter Scheidel. So here's Piketty's, again, some of you may have seen this, but his basic argument is there's a natural tendency for money and that is capital to flow to the top income groups. And these equations, the important one is sort of that RK divided by Q, Q being output, because that's what Keynes used. So R is the rate of return on investment, K is the capital stock, and Q is output. So there's a natural tendency over time, unless something happens to break it, for RK to be a larger portion of GDP. And that's going to happen as long as the rate of return on capital increases faster than the rate of growth of the economy. And again, Piketty put together these incredible data sets using really primary tax records, especially in France, but other countries. Okay, so Walter Scheidel finds the same thing, and really going back 10,000 years. Ever since humans began to farm, herd livestock, and pass their assets on to future generations, economic inequality has been a defining feature of civilization. Over thousands of years, only violent events have significantly reduced inequality. The four horsemen of leveling, mass mobilization warfare, transformative revolution, state collapse, catastrophic plagues. These are the only things that have repeatedly destroyed the fortunes of the rich. This has been the pattern for 10,000 years. So this, again, this fits in with Piketty's analysis of why the economy took off after World War II. He argues because the old institutions, the old families in Europe were really wiped out from World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. So it opened up, it sort of opened up these niches for new families, new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking. Inequality it's been like 70 years since World War II, which seems like a good thing. We've had 70 peaceful years, but the downside is that that's given time sort of for the controllers of wealth to regroup, use political power to enhance their fortunes, and so you see increases in inequality really in every country in the world that I know of. Okay, so I sort of see, again, in terms of sort of research agenda, most of the research in behavioral economics, behavioral science has been focusing on individual. Some research has been done on how individuals function as members of social groups, and this is some really important work. How effective are the different kinds of composition of groups in making decisions efficiently? It turns out that you have, by the way, have some balance in terms of gender, age, experience, and so on. But the global economy, these sort of, again, larger sweeping changes, relatively little work has been done on behavior of whole societies, global government, sort of the rise and fall of different entities. Okay, so I'm getting ready to retire in about 3 weeks. So this is part of the stuff I want to spend my time on in my remaining years, sort of environmental features as public goods, not to be protected by governments, not positive externalities to be properly priced. So I've been pretty critical of payments for ecosystem services and so on. Been doing some work in Africa. The other thing is sort of agricultural societies as ultra-social systems. Working a lot with evolutionary biologists on that. Okay, I hope that made some sense, and open it to questions.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have any questions in this room here or online? I do. Okay. Hello. I'm over on the side of the screen. I have a couple of clarifying questions. One, you were saying you've been sort of, it's not really a dialogue because they're not responding. Were you talking about Bill Rees, or I didn't catch who you said wasn't responding to your?
Well, I hate to name names. I remember.
Well, I guess what field of people? The behavioral economists?
It's sort of people that have been involved with sustainability. I'm on a couple of discussion groups. Let me just give an example. It's sort of been frustrating. Okay, there's, again, this idea is in that Bill Rees quote that it's human nature that's responsible. And a recurring theme in this stuff is that humans have always been destructive. And they cite, for example, Pleistocene overkill. You know, humans as hunter-gatherers marched across the planet, you know, killing all the big game animals, wiping out megafauna in North America, Europe, and so on. And this goes back really to a guy named Paul Martin at University of Arizona, who you know, wrote a bunch of very influential articles, I think starting in the 70s, maybe earlier. But anyway, from the best information now indicates that that didn't happen. Humans were not responsible for megafauna extinctions. And I can send you, you know, any number of papers on this. But some of the most important ones have used like what's called big data sets to do really extensive DNA analysis of ecosystems over the last couple 100,000 years. And they can use these techniques. They can take soil samples almost year by year and reconstruct the composition of plants and animals in those soil samples. And their conclusion was really it was climate change that was the driver and not human beings. So the first thing that happened, the climate change, the vegetation changed, this changed the mix of herbivores, and this, of course, changed the mix of carnivores. And this coincided with these sort of peaks. If you look at sort of history of climate, you know, warm and cold periods over the last couple of thousand years, it's mostly cold with these peaks of warm, you know, like we're experiencing today. In the past, before the Holocene, these peaks were really sharp, so megafauna could go, you know, go further north or up the mountain or something and then come back. The Holocene has been so long, about 10,000 years, that this, you know, this really finished them off. So anyway, the point is that humans may have had a role in sort of pushing these megafauna, woolly mammoths and rhinos over the edge, but, you know, we're not born killers, you know, we're not killer apes marauding the planet and killing everything in sight. And so to me, this is and anyway, I can't get a response from them. And they keep saying, well, you know, every time I stop doing, but every time I say it's human nature, people are naturally constructive, I write responses back, but I never really get replies back. So if any want to engage me this, you know, over the internet and email back and forth, I'd love it, because I'd like to get some back and forth.
I would definitely be interested to do that. I've you know, heard the arguments that, like, yeah, there have been like several waves of ice age, and that hadn't wiped the animals out, and then humans come along, and, you know, we seem to be the deciding factor. And that had been my understanding based on. So you've got a different approach and different data. I'd be really interested to.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to get some pushback. I'm convinced that isn't true. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to just sort of sharpen my argument to get somebody to sort of come back at these other arguments. Yeah, so just send me an email, and we'll start out by just sending some these articles. These articles, you know, Science, Nature, PNAS, so they're not shoddy work.
Great. Yeah.
But you know, the thing that bothers me, it's sort of, I mean, it really lets people off the hook from confronting political power. You know, maybe it's just, you know, this in the U.S. it's the age of Trump, and a lot of us have been really despondent, you know, in the last year or so. But if you want to do something about climate change, this answer is not to change individual behavior. It's to get rid of these goddamn Republicans, every one of which, you know, none of whom will say anything about climate change.
And if they do, they get voted out. Right.
Yeah. So, and they're funded. I mean, climate deniers have been well funded by ExxonMobil and a bunch of other groups, the Koch brothers, deliberately spreading misinformation. So unless we could really confront these institutional factors, and you know, it's not just you know, driving a Prius or being a vegetarian. Although I'm not slamming that. You know, it just really, you know, barking up the wrong tree.
I want to say that I really appreciate you bringing up the question of obesity as a purely like moral failing or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's institutional elements of that. So I might include a little something on that in the email I send you as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm not denying that people maybe, as hunter-gatherers, that's okay. Yes, hunter-gatherers, I mean, we probably crave fatty food. There's probably a lack of salt in our diets and so on. But, it doesn't explain the spike in the last 20 years.
Anybody else have a question? Anybody from online have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. It's fascinating. There was an aspect, I thought, of your discussion of behavioral economics relative to classical utility theory and so on, welfare economics, that was critical of a certain individualism in the behavior economics research and in their perspective also, and that may or may not have led you into the discussion that we've just been having about the individual responsibility versus collective action. I wanted to ask you a different kind of question about behavioral economics, just to get your thought on it, because I've read some things that have been critical of Sunstein and Thaler on these grounds. And that is Sunstein makes a big deal about libertarian paternalism. And
Yeah, right.
He wants to have a kind of acceptable mode of nudging that supposedly doesn't really undermine libertarian principles and rights, because after all, there's still the same choice set. If you want to take it. But
Right.
I'm less interested in that debate than the question of is the governance philosophy that's really behind behavioral economics, is it elitist or genuinely democratic? It seems to me that if elites understand better what is in people's self-interests and understand cognitive limitations and mistakes that people typically make, they try to exploit those mistakes, but they don't try to correct them.
Yeah. All right.
And so I would submit that if you just exploit known cognitive mistakes, you aren't actually being ethically democratic in your political theory. Democracy requires a mitigation and an educational remediation of those cognitive errors. I guess it assumes that human nature is plastic enough to actually get beyond some of those things that cognitive psychology and behavioral economics have discovered. So could you comment on that big, broad mushmark?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting insight. I guess, I think, for example, like McDonald's, the fast food industry, they do an incredible amount of research on how to make people like their French fries. I mean, the flavor is, sort of honed to make them addictive, maybe not physically addictive like heroin or something. But yeah, the research of corporations, selling people things. I mean, the business community knew about behavioral economics a long time before economists did. And they do, and sometimes it's sort of giving people what they want, but in other times it's sort of, creating wants that, that weren't there before. And, is that democratic? That's a really good question. And of course, now the big thing here is misinformation and fake news and all that. But apparently, the Russian government and people working for them, they did psychological research. They knew exactly how to frame an ad to get the results they wanted. And you don't know what's real and what isn't. And the whole issue of how to regulate that is just it's beyond me. I really don't know. I mean, it seems like somebody has to decide. And my opinion has always been, well, just, let it come out in the open. And as soon as people find out that this is fake or phony, then they won't believe it anymore. But apparently that's not true. So, but yeah, sort of. I mean, you're allowing people to make choices, but you're pushing them to make one kind of choice as opposed to another. And how you control that, I just don't know.
I have a comment from Burlington.
Okay.
Hello, I am the only student in the seminar that is
Oh, hi.
at University of Vermont. Everyone else is at McGill.
Okay.
And I just really appreciate your talk. My background, I did a master's in neoclassical economics and had the pleasure to do the very abstract algebra of game theory a couple of years ago.
Good.
And my dissertation, my master's dissertation, was pretty much on the intersection of political economy, culture, and sustainable development. I studied the impact of democracy and culture on the Environmental Performance Index in our panel data from 1978 until 2010. And the neoclassical school is just so conservative that basically the whole cultural dimension is completely. I received a lot of criticism for including some sort of culture and sort of like skipping the assumption that every actor in the global economy and policymakers are acting in a way that is rational and that there might be cultural differences. And just the example you made from the researcher, I forgot his name, but at the University of British Columbia with the anthropology background.
Right, Joseph Henrich, yeah.
Yeah, it's just such an inspiring work, which especially in European economic school, especially I studied in Portugal.
Oh yeah.
It's really far away from acknowledging that culture and irrational actors might have an impact on policy decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it sort of brings up this whole power thing. There's a really good book by Philip Murawski, a recent book, Never Let a Serious Crisis Go to Waste. And it's a history of something called the Mount Pelerin Society, really founded by Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and others in the 1940s. But you know, that society really gave neoliberalism this sort of not only ideological core, but also sort of fundraising core. I mean, the Mount Pelerin Society still exists. It's some of the most influential people in the world belong to it, including some leaders of world government, like who is the president of the Czech Republic, extreme right-wing guy. Anyway, and you know, the sort of Eastern Europe now has become sort of a hotbed of really extreme political thought. A lot of it comes out of that society. The Koch brothers are members and so on too. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, this thing, it hasn't been an accident that this school of thought has become so dominant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Name of the book, please. I think we should get that and have it for the project.
Murawski's book, yeah. I can, yeah.
Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste. Is that the title?
Yeah, Never Let a Serious Crisis Go to Waste. Yeah, he starts out by talking about the crash in 2008. And, you know, a lot of us thought that would really change the economics profession. I mean, you had top economists sort of, you know, crying at congressional testimonies. And how could our models have been so wrong, including Alan Greenspan, you know, for all our vain ran. But yet nothing happened. I mean, it didn't faze them. It didn't phase policy. It didn't phase austerity policies or anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, while I've got you, just could two questions. It would be absolutely this is absolutely first rate and very important talk. I wondered if it would be okay if we put a link to it on our website.
Oh, of course, sure.
And also if we could put the slides at the same place somehow on the website.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So can you email those either to me or to Tim, who's ever been in your contact?
Yeah.
I have a copy of those already.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, so another thing, I mean, I'd really like, again, I'm retiring, so I mean, I'm plan to have a lot of free time. I don't know how that'll work out. But I'm working on this project in South Sudan. Been working with United Nations Environment Program. But I'm writing, I've been involved in something called a TEAB for agriculture. And actually, we did a lot in this, a couple of chapters I worked on the obesity, the epidemic, and how government funding actually promoted that. But anyway, I'm writing this up as a white paper, and I'd like to, whoever's interested, I'd like to run it by you before I send it. Probably take me another month or so to finish it.
Well, there are several people in our project who would be very, very interested, I think, in reading it and offering their comments.
Very good, yeah.
Tim and well, virtually everybody in the room there would fit that description one way or another, including Svenja, who's not in the room, which is still on the call, right? So, so yeah, please send it, I guess, to Tim and to me, and then we'll pass it around as to people who want it.
Okay, and send me the stuff you guys are working on too. Some of your work I know, but some I don't.
Hi, Gabriel here. I have a quick question, or get your feedback on this. And we're talking about private enterprise and the public sector, the government sector. Do you think that we have to reform the actual patent system, and how we can do that? Just wondering on your opinion on that.
The quick answer is yes. I don't know how to do it, but yeah, the patent system, especially for drugs. Mariana Mazzucato talks about that, and she talks about actually taxpayer-funded research in the U.S. has made possible a lot of highly selective drugs that the drug companies have the patents for, and they're selling like for hundreds of dollars a dose. Yeah, it's really criminal. I mean, this whole thing about, you know, the private companies driving entrepreneurship and these lone guys working in their basement is sort of a myth. That, you know, the government funds this research and the private companies take the profits. You know. Yeah, but something definitely needs to be done about drug patents, especially.
Thank you.
I had one question. I'd like to just briefly return to the concept of rationality, and I think it's obviously quite a tricky concept. But do you think that we essentially need to abandon the idea altogether, or is it simply that the mainstream economics has gone too far and defining rationality too narrowly? Because one example I can think of is that the studies on the Ultimatum game that you mentioned in different societies, where it was concluded that no society is economically rational as mainstream economics would define it. But that behavior actually turns out to be rational when you consider that a game is repeated indefinitely. So when there's such a thing as punishment behavior or policing behavior or reputation, that then if you define it in those broader terms, you can again use the concept of rationality to describe that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yes, it's, I mean, I've had talks with Herbert Gintis says, you know, don't abandon rationality, don't even abandon economic man, even though he's obviously one of the critiques of the theory in terms of behavior. Just that rationality defined in terms of these sort of axiomatic concepts. You know, transitivity, A is referred to B, B is referred to C. Well, people don't really do that. They prefer A to B, B to C, then C to A. And, you know, a lot of studies have shown that. I mean, all you need really is the one-shot prisoner's dilemma. I mean, people don't act according to the, you know, Nash equilibrium that came out of that game. People cooperate even though when it's irrational to do so. This really bothered John Nash, by the way, who I think invented that game. He played it with some really you know, intelligent people at the Rand Corporation, and they always cooperated. Couldn't understand it. But yeah, I mean, rationality, sure, it's rational to care about others. It's rational to care about your social standing and so on.
Okay, any final questions? Oh, Alistair. Okay, Alice has a question.
I was just thinking of your one of your last slides, the one that is showing now, behavior and governance at 3 levels: individual, social, and global economy. And I was wondering if and where you see in this framework the role of institution, political institution, national and international.
Yeah, that's what I'm really interested in. I've been doing a lot. This sounds odd. I've been doing a lot of work with biologists on ants and ant colonies. Okay, if you look at an ant colony, it's an incredibly complicated structure, and they're ants and termites also, other species that are other kinds of animals that have agriculture. And if you look at like a termite mound, it's as if it's designed by an engineer. I mean, the way it's positioned with the sun, the height, the width of it, the way it goes down into the ground to draw cool air from 15, 20 feet under the ground. So that's a kind of rationality, but it's beyond individual rationality. And this is kind of another thing that bothers me with sort of humans. I mean, we always say, well, humans are really intelligent. We put a man on the moon. We thought of the theory of relativity. Well, hardly any of us did. I mean, how many of us really understand the theory of relativity? And if you look at a city, I mean, did one person design a city, build a city? No, it was sort of hundreds of thousands of individual decisions. And so this gets in some really tricky area of what is intelligence, what is rationality. There are philosophers like Daniel Dennett who really deny the notion of individual rationality and intelligence. Everything is just mechanical. We're like cogs in a machine programmed to do certain things. So, get back to your question about sort of global governance. I mean, I think we've evolved this system that really is really not under the control of individual humans. It's sort of ultra social system. So I think what we should do really is reassert our humanity and somehow get control of it. I mean, we need to, and how you do this, I don't know. It seems to imply sort of universal global government, which I admit to being uneasy with, but it may be the only way to keep us from collapsing. I read a paper about this with a colleague. I don't think I sent it, but in the behavior and brain sciences, sort of the economic origins of ultra-sociality. Yeah, but I mean, the system is definitely out of control now. How we can take control of it and that's kind of the number one question now.
Okay, are there any final questions or comments? All right, well, John, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, and all of you, please keep in touch.
Yes,
yeah, definitely will do.
It's really been terrific. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.